Guido didn't die in a fantasy bubble. Guido died having saved his son. Guido transformed the perspective his son had on life deliberately in order to save him and to help him grow into a man. This was a very real sacrifice. So the message here is not to blind yourself to reality, but rather to use your perspective as a tool, because your perspective affects the strategies you're able to think of. It affects your creativity, your problem solving. Hi, I'm Gabriel from GabrielSeanWallace.com, and this is Identity Coaching with Movies, the podcast where we use movies as coaching tools. I'm an identity coach, which means that I help you to rediscover, reconnect, and recreate your identity from the inside out. And in this podcast, we use movies as the magnificent tools they are for identity coaching. In this episode, we're using the movie Life is Beautiful to look at life as a game of riddles. Buongiorno! Okay, this is episode number 5 of Identity Coaching with Movies, the podcast where we use movies as tools for personal development and identity work. And remember that in episode 3, we did not complete Life is Beautiful, so we're continuing with it in this episode. And you might be thinking, well, what happened to episode 4? Well, episode 4, I just released a clip from the first ever episode that I recorded. It's just a short little clip. It's when I was talking about what art can be used for, and I believe I titled it, "What is the purpose of art?" And I'm going to do more of those little clips in this podcast as well, I think, because the long format might not be quite as immediately appealing to a lot of people as it is to me and people like me who like to listen to this long format. So I figured what I can do easily enough is take little segments here and there from the episodes and create separate episodes out of those. So let me know if you like those. I also added a little bit of music to that one, and I know that some people don't like that, but some people really do like little music tracks along with clips. So just listen to it, episode 4. It's less than 5 minutes long, and let me know what you think. So we are continuing with Life is Beautiful, and I promise it won't be as long this time because it's only a 2-parter, and we did the first part already, which was the big part, actually. This one, in the last one, we focused on life as art, and in this episode on the movie, we're focusing on life as a game of riddles. And if you're new to this podcast, which you might be, what we do is we use the film as a launching pad to explore identity. I'm an identity coach. That means I help people with their identity issues. Some people call it identity crisis. And we really explore that deeply in this podcast. And we use movies as really a launching pad or a tool in order to help us to do that. So with that said, if you would like the identity worksheet that supplements this podcast, I highly recommend that you do it and complete it in tandem with listening to this podcast. And to get hold of that, you just go to my website, GabrielSeanWallace.com, and there will be a little pop-up that will ask you if you want access to all of my identity worksheets, and I'll send it to you immediately. It's in a little zip folder. Got that sorted out, and I'll email it to you, and you will also get updates each time I release a new episode, and you can click on the new link to get not the new link, the new attachment to get your worksheet. So again, that's GabrielSeanWallace.com, GabrielSeanWallace.com. So I hope you enjoyed Life is Beautiful Part 1, Life as Art. Now this one, we're focusing on life as a game of riddles. So you might remember, if you've seen the film, and hopefully you have, hopefully you've also listened to that other podcast. But if not, then it's okay just to listen to this one on Life as a Game of Riddles. If you remember, there were quite a few riddles told directly in that movie, right, between Guido and Dr. Lessing. And Dr. Lessing calls Guido a genius, which we found out in the last podcast was a reference to Schopenhauer's definition of genius. If you want to know more about that, just listen to episode 3. And what I really want to point to at the beginning of this one, and well, really address, it's an issue that needs to be addressed, is that some criticism comes with how the movie kind of goes light with just how harsh the conditions in the camps actually were. And my response to that is that the story itself transcends the horrors that I could only imagine while on a bad trip, you know. It's obviously set in this horrific backdrop of Auschwitz, or at least a concentration camp from World War II. And of course, it doesn't reflect the terrible conditions that were really in those camps. And I don't think it has to, because you have to take the historical inaccuracies as a signal to locate the experience as somewhat independent from reality. Or maybe reality isn't even the best word, because reality can be deeper than the material reality. But let's go with that, independent from material reality. You see, what it does through the telling of the story in the movie is it really points to a deeper truth. As I said in the last podcast, that the artist paints a deeper truth, or creates a deeper truth, I think I said. And I think, if I remember correctly, Picasso said something like that the artist doesn't lie but tells the deeper truth. And that's really what I got from this movie, Life is Beautiful. And so you have to understand that the story being told doesn't need to have every detail of how the concentration camps actually were. Of course they were worse than they are in the movie. The movie probably wouldn't really work if it had been created to be the same. I don't think that's the point. And I think that there is there's this quote from the Guardian newspaper that says, quote, "There are factual inaccuracies in the movie which Benigni included precisely to distance his film from the historical truth." And then it quotes Benigni saying, "Only documentaries of survivors and the majesty of the truth can tell us what is this tragedy. Otherwise, you are imitating, which is not respectful. I respect this tragedy, so I stayed far away from it. It's more strong if you evoke. I don't use tomato soup. I don't make fake blood." End quote. Now, I think that's very insightful and very true. He's telling a story, and he's using a backdrop to illustrate his points. And I've also read some people saying that Guido is denying the reality of the situation. Well, we got into that in the last podcast, right? It is not a denial of reality. It is not being an apologist. It is not escapism, as some people have said. It is a strategy with which to psychologically cope with the present. It's clear that despite the playfulness of Guido, he is very much in touch with the threat. He is solving the puzzle. He is the one who takes action. Not only is he using his gifts as an artist and as a comedian, even in the character, Guido is at heart a comedian, right? Not only is he using these gifts to service people and to actively strategize a way out of the situation, but also remember at the end of the movie, he leaves to hide when everyone else stays put in that little bunker that they're in, right? So he's active. He's taking his son out and he's looking for the best hiding place. He is the one who is looking for his wife. He is the one who attempts to solve this riddle with his connection to the Riddler, right? Who is the Riddler? The Riddler is Dr. Lessing, the one who is providing him with these riddles. He is continuously solving the miniature riddles in the story, while at the same time believing that the overarching riddle will be solved. The overarching riddle of the threat to life. And he does it with a smile on his face. And see, that's where some people get muddled, I believe. That's the problem people have, because a lot of people think, if your life is in danger, or if you're in a bad situation even, these days your life doesn't even have to be in danger. You don't have to be in the Holocaust. It's just if you are in a bad situation, people think you're supposed to have a frown, right? You're not supposed to solve your riddles in life with a smile on your face. What are you doing? Wipe that smile off your face, right? That's how people kind of react with this crabs in a bucket mentality a lot of the time. So that's what I think people mainly have a problem with when they criticize this movie. And look, to be fair, there are not many critics. There's a minority. Most people just adore this movie. So I'm talking about a small minority. But even when he says, remember at the beginning, near the beginning, when they paint the horse green and he says, "What are they going to do to me? Paint me yellow and write Jew on my chest?" Right? You can call that denying reality if you want, but really, what's good in him living a life of fear? It's literally years later that they put him and his son in the truck. He hasn't even got his son yet at this point in the movie. He hasn't even been married yet, right? So it's years later. So what's the good in him saying, oh yeah, they're probably going to do the same to me, and oh, what could happen, and then get all worked up about it? What's better, that or saying, what are they going to do with me? Right? What's better? Living life now without creating a daily drip of fear for yourself and letting that leak into the minds of your family as well, when there's nothing that he can do about it anyway, or nothing you can do about it anyway, or choosing to enjoy the years of your blossoming romance with your wife and the first few years of your son's life, knowing that if the time comes to deal with this threat later, then you will, right? So you see, Guido, he is internally pliant. He's flexible to the situation. Which internal strategy do you think is better? So there on your worksheet, question 1. Is there anything in life where you could develop such a strategy, but you barricade yourself in doing so because you tell yourself that it would be a denial of reality? Is there anything like that you can think of in your life? So remember that Guido Dies, right? His way of living eventually leads to a failure in the material world. But he was never playing that game. He dies willing to sacrifice himself to make sure that his wife and his son live, knowing that he might die, right? That's his choice. And Roberto Benigni, by having Guido die at the end, right? I'm talking Benigni as a writer here. He fully acknowledges that this tragic Holocaust was a riddle that could not be solved. All right? He acknowledges that. Guido dies. Now, who knows whether if he had solved that riddle successfully for that Nazi doctor, Dr. Lessing, the Riddler, whether he would have been rewarded with a means of escape. We don't know. Guido and the audience are just so stunned at this point at the insanity of the disconnection that Dr. Lessing apparently has with the reality that Guido is facing, right? That all hope of escape through this way is suddenly extinguished when we realize just how removed the doctor is from his humanity. Dr. Lessing is left making these fricative sounds of a platypus, right? And it's funny, but at the same time, absolutely tragic. Because as far as we knew at that point, that was Guido's final hope. That was the family's final hope of getting out of there. And we actually thought, this might be the way. But it turned out that Dr. Lessing was just completely disconnected, as most Nazis were, from their humanity. But, of course, this still doesn't drive Guido into a state of helplessness. What does he do? He goes and looks at his son again, and he smiles, because he still has faith. Yes, I said the F word. Faith. He reminds himself not only of why he is going on, but the presence of his son is the very embodiment of his faithful vision of the future. And so the very sight of his son is enough to completely direct his attitude. His faith is prominent in the first half of the film when he gets everything that he wants, when he's pursuing Dora, right? Asking for the key, Maria, the key, and all of the rest of that. And it's a kind of quasi-mystical, quasi-miracle, half by him, half by divinity kind of deal. So, this faith serves him, and serves him well in the movie. Because without this faith, he really would have given up, and his son probably would have died, right? So the question is, on your worksheet, how could you give yourself more faith in life? Now, it doesn't have to be religious or even spiritual. It can be any kind of faith. Take a moment, think about that. How could you? If you had to give yourself more faith in life, how could you? Now, I really wanted to include in this podcast a book that I think Benigni must have had very prominently in his mind when he was scripting this movie. And that is, we talked about Schopenhauer in the last podcast, which of course is very prominent. But another one is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. If you haven't read this book, you just have to. It's one of those critical books for anybody doing identity work. It's a critical book to read. I absolutely recommend it. And so in this book, Viktor Frankl writes, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering." Now, this is a strategy. This is a survival strategy. And not only a survival strategy in the physical sense, but also a survival strategy in the egoic sense, right? Because the ego creates meaning. And that's wonderful. You should also be conscious that meaning is created by you. And in a sense, it's an illusion, right? But there's nothing wrong with an illusion just as long as you know that it's an illusion and that you are the creator. You are the artist. You are the artist of the grand illusion that is life, right? Or let me put that a slightly different way. You are the artist of the grand illusion that is the meaning of life. And so man's search for meaning, this book was definitely incorporated in the movie. And another piece of evidence that I really think points to that is that in the book Man's Search for Meaning, Schopenhauer is mentioned, I think it's twice actually, when he's talking about freedom from suffering. Schopenhauer is actually mentioned in the book. So perhaps Benigni was actually the spine of this story came from the book Man's Search for Meaning. Now, I don't know that, but I'm thinking that the spine originally came from Man's Search for Meaning, and then from there he explored Schopenhauer, and then Schopenhauer really became the tissue, the blood of the story, of the movie. But anyway, also Nietzsche says, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And Guido certainly has a why in this situation, right? His family, his son, his wife. And it just shows that, again, you can reframe your whole attitude to life. You can choose your own attitude in any circumstances. And this is what Man's Search for Meaning is all about. That man is responsible for life in some way. And I want to read a little quote. Oh, it's actually a long quote from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And that is when he's actually talking about the meaning of life. And so he says, quote, "The meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at any given moment. To put the question in general terms would be comparable to the question posed to a chess champion. Tell me, master, what is the best move in the world? There simply is no such thing as the best, or even a good move, apart from a particular situation in a game and the particular personality of one's opponent. The same holds for a human's existence. One should not search for an abstract meaning of life. Everyone has his own specific vocation or mission in life to carry out a concrete assignment which demands fulfillment. Therein he can't be replaced, nor can his life be repeated." End quote. Very powerful, you see? So what does that tell you? It tells you not only that are we the creators of meaning in our lives, but that it's relative to our circumstances, our situations. And so when you're facing a situation as horrific as the Holocaust, well, you have to adapt the meaning that you attach to your life. And Guido does in a lot of ways. I want to point out that Viktor Frankl also says in the book that he smiles when he is told that he is most likely to be sent to the chambers. And he said in the book that this was a normal reaction, as there is nothing to lose at that point. And when he got thinking of his wife, he says, quote, "I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment in the contemplation of his beloved." And so we know that when Guido is in contemplation of his beloved, right, his wife very often, also his son, but let's just stick with the romance part for now. When he is in contemplation of his beloved, you see in his eyes the meaning that it brings his life, the bliss that it brings into his soul, right, his spirit. And so he uses that energy, that blissful energy, to reciprocate to the universe what the universe has given to him. So my question to you now is, what could you bring to mind and feel in order to know bliss? Or as close as you can get to it at any time. You can feel bliss. You can choose to feel bliss at any time. You truly can. It's a choice. It's a choice about what you think about, what you bring to your mind. It's always a choice. It's just an illusion that we think it's not a choice and that we have to feel a certain way in a certain situation. It's like, oh, you're in the Holocaust. You must be feeling terrible, right? Well, no, because someone who actually was in the Holocaust, Viktor Frankl, I didn't mention that in case you didn't know. Sorry. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he actually was in a concentration camp and he wrote about his experience. So, from his perspective, he actually learns to feel bliss even in that situation. And so does Guido. So don't say that it's completely unrealistic, because this is a man who's actually saying, not only he's saying it happened, but he's also giving psychological reasons for why it happened. See, Viktor Frankl's a psychologist. So he knows, he's actually studied why his reaction was such. So riddles. Riddles are about shifting your perspective, right? Riddles force you to use all of your intellect to think in different ways, right? Imagine how it is to actually think in a different way. People from all generations, you're sitting there listening to this now in the 21st century. Well, there are people who, let's say, hundreds of years ago, somewhere in a jungle, they were not just thinking different thoughts. I don't mean just thinking different thoughts. They actually thought in a different way. Like you actually could think differently. And you know what? It's not just people in a jungle 200 years ago. It's other people in the world right now understand how to actually mold their minds differently so that they think differently. Not just think different thoughts. They think in different patterns. They think in a different approach, with a different approach. It's like if you have a skill set of being a painter and someone else has a skill set of being a chemist, we'll apply that difference to thinking. Some people actually think in a completely foreign, alien way to you. Some people have actually trained themselves to think differently. It's an exciting thought. It's an exciting prospect, right? So riddles can help you do this, right? And riddles are also to be solved, right? The point of a riddle, both, right? They're to get you to think in a different way, and they're also to be solved. So what are some of the explicit riddles in this movie? Well, the first one is, the more there is, the less you see. Darkness, right? It's darkness. That was Dr. Lessing's first riddle. And that tells us about him as a person. And it also tells us about what is to come, right? Darkness will come into everyone's life in the form of the Holocaust. And then Guido replies with his own riddle about Snow White, right? So you go from darkness to white. Darkness to Snow White. And this is a riddle about serving. That tells us about him. So see, while Dr. Lessing's riddle tells us about him, right, darkness, Guido's riddle about Snow White and serving tells us about him. And then Dr. Lessing's next riddle is, if you say my name, I'm not there anymore. What am I? And the answer is silence. And silence is, of course, a recurring theme throughout the movie. And it is actually reminiscent of a quote by John Stuart Mill. This is what it reminded me of anyway. It might not remind you of it. But a quote by John Stuart Mill that bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. Right, that's silence. And this is actually often misattributed to Edmund Burke as saying the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Actually, he didn't say that. But the point is that Guido does something, right? He uses his gifts to give. And silence is used at the right time to solve the right riddles. See, it's relative, situational again. But when it's required, Guido speaks. Now, how is it used at the right time? Well, for example, remember he tells his son to be silent when he's pretending to be a German kid. He is silent at the right times so that they don't die, basically, right? And but also he speaks and he breaks silence when he needs to. For example, when he plays the loudspeaker with music to his wife. When he and his son go in and talk on the loudspeaker. Yeah, that's probably something that in real life they would have gotten killed for. But again, it's separated from the reality of it. So, and also he takes his chances with the doctor, Dr. Lessing, when he answers his riddle, when he's standing in line there getting checked out by the doctor. He breaks the silence there by answering silence. And you see, the genius of Guido is that he uses everything in his environment to his advantage, right? Meaning that he uses everything as fuel for his desired context as an artist. For example, he climbed, when he's at the school teaching the kid, he uses the table as a pulpit and poses as the inspector. And he uses the situation as an opportunity to educate the students in a less racist way, right? They're obviously being educated with racism as it is. And so he uses the opportunity, being there, posing as the inspector, as an opportunity to educate them on the ridiculousness of saying that their race is superior, right? Also, when the horse is painted green, he uses this to sweep up his principessa, right? And he transforms the horse into a romantic gesture, a vehicle, right? This is the one vehicle he can control, and that is a green horse, which reminds me of nature. So that's interesting to to contemplate. And later in the concentration camp, nearly every time he is confronted with something that is a threat, he converts it into something that will be a gift for his son, right? He translates the German as something that is a game. And so this, for Guido, is really a game of riddles. And he wouldn't be able to translate that reality and save his son's life if he himself did not see life as not only art, but as a game and as a riddle. Right? Guido is very creative. And you need creativity to solve riddles. You need to think in a creative problem-solving manner. And right at the end also, this is a quote by Roberto Benigni himself. He says, quote, "I think that sometimes only comedians can reach the peaks of tragedy. At the end of life is beautiful. I use the lowest gag in comedy, dressing as a woman. But in this case, it is the very peak of tragedy." Powerful. And in Viktor Frankl's book, he also says that the categorical imperative of logotherapy, this is his therapy of basically writing as therapy, writing and recording your own life narrative as therapy. That is what logotherapy is. And I use that quite a lot in my coaching. He says, quote, "Live as if you are living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. It seems to me that there is nothing which would stimulate a man's responsibleness more than this maxim, which invites him to imagine first that the present is past, and second, that the past may yet be changed and amended. Such a precept confronts him with life's finiteness, as well as the finality of what makes out of his life and what he makes out of his life and himself." So I mentioned this a little bit also in Groundhog Day, the episode on Groundhog Day, and it is so powerful. I can't recommend this technique enough. Live as if you are living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you were about to act now. How does that change how you act? And then he goes on to say as well, quote, "The logotherapist's role consists of widening and broadening the visual field of the patient so that the whole spectrum of potential meaning becomes conscious and visible to him. By declaring that man is responsible and must actualize the potential meaning of his life, I must stress that the true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his psyche, as if it were a closed system." End quote. Very important, okay? And it might seem like I'm saying the opposite, but I'm not, and I'll tell you why in a second. One more very short quote from him is, quote, "Self-actualization is only possible as a side effect of self-transcendence." End quote. I love this. You see, you need insight, but you also need outsight. This is the paradox of identity work. You have to do the inner work, yes, but it's not real unless you can channel that out into the world. You do not exist in a vacuum. Identity work is not just about living in a bubble of fantasy. It's about developing the right strategies to transcend all the limitations you've put around yourself and to transform who you are, not only on the inside, but very crucially on the outside too. You need to channel your work into the universe, into the world, and let the world give you feedback on how you're showing up. Is this authentic? Are you truly in alignment? Right? Guido didn't die in a fantasy bubble. Guido died having saved his son. Guido transformed the perspective his son had on life deliberately in order to save him and to help him grow into a man. This was a very real sacrifice. So the message here is not to blind yourself to reality, but rather to use your perspective as a tool, because your perspective affects the strategies you're able to think of. It affects your creativity, your problem solving. If you get stuck interpreting your situation as hopeless, then you won't be able to strategize. You won't be able to solve the riddles that life inevitably challenges you with. So, my final two questions here. What internal gifts have you not yet brought out into the world? How might you do that? That's the first one. And then the final question is, imagine that all of your life is a riddle. How can you cultivate your ability to solve it? It's more of an exercise than a question, really. But I want you to contemplate that, because only you contemplating it will get you the results, not me giving you the answers. So, again, I recommend you go to the website, get the worksheets for yourself, and please, if you enjoyed this podcast, I would really, really love for you to leave me a positive review on iTunes or on YouTube. Give me a like and a comment and share it. I would love for you to share it with other friends who might at least find this interesting, fascinating, or it hopefully will even be able to help them. So subscribe, leave a review wherever you're listening to it. Really does help the podcast grow. I want as many people to benefit from this as possible. And if you do, I might even read out your review on the show. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, even if you're not watching this on YouTube, because I have other videos there as well. Check out the website, of course. And if you want coaching, then send me a message. Send me a message on GabrielSeanWallace.com. You would get a completely personalized service and my full attention for 3 months of one-to-one coaching via Skype, Zoom, WeChat. You can find out more about that on my website too. Have a great day wherever and whenever and whoever you are, and keep growing into you.